Bruce Klingner is a senior research fellow at the Heritage Foundation and a former CIA deputy division chief for Korea, and he joins us now from Washington. Bruce, in terms of the UN National Security Council in this emergency meeting this afternoon, what actions can and should they take?
Well, we're hoping China will be more forthcoming in allowing stronger UN response to the yet another North Korean violation of the resolutions. We're hoping that China would allow a reduction in the amount of coal that North Korea would be allowed to export. And we're also hoping that China will allow the cessation of North Korea's overseas workers, which are bringing currency into the North Korean regime, mostly for the nuclear and missile programs. China would also, we hope, would reduce its exports of oil to the regime.
You talk about a lot of hopes, but that doesn't mean that we actually see action, does it?
Well, it's always been a case with China that they underperform, they underdeliver on long-standing promises to implement required UN resolutions. And also we saw, again, the Chinese president promised Trump that China would more fully implement those sanctions. And once again, the U.S. has been disappointed. But there are things the U.S. can do using its own laws to go after violators, including Chinese entities that are facilitating the North Korean nuclear and missile programs.
We heard China and Russia have called for this double suspension, an end to North Korea's nuclear program and an end to U.S.-South Korea military exercises. But we've also heard Kim Jong-un say that he's not going to negotiate with his capabilities. So how realistic is that?
Well, the North Korean officials told me in Europe last month that denuclearization is totally off the table. There's nothing the U.S. or South Korea can offer to induce them to abandon their nuclear arsenal. The freeze for freeze that China and Russia and previously North Korea push is really a non-starter. They're offering something North Korea doesn't legally possess. They're already not allowed to do nuclear and missile tests in return for military exercises that the U.S. is allowed to do. A more reasonable opening position would be North Korea offer up its own annual military exercises in return for constraints on the allied military exercises.
We were talking about China before. The president's strategy had been obviously to put pressure on China. He since tweeted, "So much for China working with us." So what does the White House's plan appear to be then now?
Well, in addition to hoping, again, that China will do what it's supposed to do, the U.S. can use its own laws. The U.S. has been pulling its punches on enforcing our laws to protect our financial system and to protect U.S. banks. Chinese entities, along with North Korean entities, have been misusing the U.S. financial system for money laundering and other illicit activities. The Bank of Dandong that the Trump administration sanctioned last week is really just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't done Chinese entities in any real form until now, and we hope that the Trump administration will sanction additional violators of our laws.
Yeah, does the U.S. need China in order to get somewhere with North Korea?
Certainly we'd get a lot further if China would, for example, do the same kind of economic warfare against North Korea that they did against South Korea for Seoul's decision to deploy the THAAD ballistic missile defense system to better defend against China's North Korean ally. But the U.S. doesn't have to get Chinese permission to enforce our laws.
Right.
Given the centrality of the U.S. dollar and the U.S. financial system, those entities, whether they have their own accounts or correspondent accounts, are using U.S. banks for illicit purposes. So we can do things against those entities to wean them away from engaging with North Korea.
We heard a lot of talk yesterday about how North Korea almost seemed to be taunting President Trump, especially with this latest missile launch and the tests that they've been doing. One of the things, though, that I was hearing about was how they've sort of been getting better at hiding these launches. Why would that be worrisome to the U.S.?
Well, it's extremely worrisome. This is a mobile ICBM. It's a missile on a road mobile transporter. The previous ICBM that they were working on, what we call the Taepodong, they call the Unha, was from a fixed launch site, much easier to identify and, if necessary, target during a conflict. Mobile missiles, whether they're land-based such as this or a submarine launch ballistic missile, are harder to detect, harder to track, and if necessary, harder to attack during a conflict.
Also the idea of not just the missile launch, but you've got to have the nuclear capability. Which is more worrisome to the U.S., just the ability to reach the U.S. mainland or the ability, obviously, to also do that with nuclear weapons? I guess what I'm saying is, where do they stand in sort of trying to get that nuclear warhead down to size where they could put it on the missile?
Well, I think they're further along than many people expect. All the expert assessments is that they have at least 16 to 20 nuclear weapons. Most experts assess that the No-Dong medium-range ballistic missile is already nuclear capable, which means all of South Korea and Japan are already under a nuclear threat today. We're not sure where they are on the development path for the nuclear weapons for their intermediate range missiles that can hit U.S. bases in Guam or the U.S. mainland, but if they're not there yet, they're certainly on that path to development.
We saw the U.S. and South Korea military exercises as a response. What is the message that's being sent with those?
Those kind of exercises really are more a message of reassurance to our allies than a hope that they will alter North Korea or Kim Jong-un's behavior. And on the nuclear weapons, we had at least 4 U.S. four-star generals who assessed that North Korea has, or we have to assume for planning purposes, already has an ICBM nuclear capability. Most outside experts think they're not there yet.
Bruce Klingner, a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, former CIA Deputy Division Chief for Korea. Thank you so much for the insight.
Well, thank you.